Hello there, it's Jason Gorman here from Codemanship with a short video on habits for effective and safe refactoring. So when I do refactoring, there's a bunch of habits I try to observe, just as I do when I'm doing test-driven development and when I'm doing design and continuous integration and all these other disciplines. The first habit I want to highlight is a fairly obvious one, but it's one that people tend to miss, which is that refactoring is only safe if we have adequate test coverage in order to ensure that we haven't broken our code. So the first habit is to check whether or not we have adequate test assurance on the code we're about to refactor. And if there isn't adequate test assurance, then we need to write tests to get that test assurance up to where we need it to be. So let's look at an example of a class here. I'm using Emma for Eclipse, which is a test coverage tool. And I've run a test coverage report. I run the tests, and it tells me that certain branches, certain paths through this code are not tested. So if I were refactoring the isUnderAge method, I might not have complete confidence that I can do it without breaking it. And my tests might not let me know that. So I might consider writing some extra tests just to get the coverage up. Now I'm not actually going to be refactoring this method, as tempted as I am to do that. And the reason is because I have set myself a refactoring goal. So that's the next habit. Set yourself clear goals for refactoring. So I've identified a code smell, feature envy in the customer class. It has an unhealthy interest in the features of the address class, as we can see here in this expression. And the address class is really just a data class. It's just fields and some getters. So to eliminate this code smell, I would wish to apply the appropriate formula for eliminating feature envy. So that's the next habit. Learn to recognize code smells and learn the various sort of refactoring dances, the sequences of refactorings or the kinds of refactorings that can be used to eliminate that code smell. If you're not sure of your code smells and your refactorings, then I highly recommend investing in a copy of Martin Fowler's Refactoring book, as well as Refactoring to Patterns by Joshua Kerievsky. There are also many, I probably pronounced his name wrong there, I do apologize, Joshua. There are also a number of online resources that have sort of lists of code smells and talk about the different refactorings you can use to eliminate them. So know your code smells and know the refactorings to deal with them is another habit. Okay, now before I do this refactoring, I want to be sure that my tests are passing. You should never refactor if there are failing tests, because the tests are your safety net for refactoring. It's not safe to refactor if your tests are failing. So never refactor on a red light, always refactor on a green light. So I'm going to run our tests here and just check that everything's passing. Good. So it's safe to begin. Now I'm going to try wherever possible to use the automated refactoring tools. There's two very good reasons for this. The first one is that they can complete a refactoring in a single indivisible step. So they're like transactions against your code, which makes them repeatable, and also, more importantly, it makes them easily undoable. So let's do a refactoring here. Now I'm going to have to do this in two steps, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to extract this expression here into its own method. But there's a quirk in the Eclipse refactoring for extract method that means it doesn't actually recognize, let me just highlight that again, sorry. It doesn't recognize that it is a valid expression. I don't know why for the extract method refactoring, but I can do it in two steps. If I extract a local variable, and at which point it does recognize that it's a valid expression, so there you go, and let's call that address summary for now. So I do that refactoring, and as soon as I've done that, of course, I run the tests. That's what they're there for. Okay, so that's worked, that's safe. Now that I've done that, I can do what I originally wanted to do, which is extract this expression into its own method, which I'm going to call getAddressSummary. Okay, and of course I run the tests again as soon as I've done that. So that's the first step in eliminating feature envy. We've extracted the offending block of code, the block of code that contains the feature envy, into its own method. So we've isolated that, and now once we've isolated it in a method, we can move it to the address class where it arguably belongs. Now, address.getAddress summary sounds a bit odd, so I'm just going to change the name of that so that it's a little more succinct. Okay, and of course we run the tests again. And all is well. One last bit of cleanup to do. I'm just going to inline this temporary variable I created for the purposes of refactoring. Okay, and run the tests. So everything's working. The feature envy has been eliminated. And at this point, I've achieved my refactoring goal. Now, refactoring is usually a much longer process than that. We're usually working through quite a long sequence of refactorings, and every one of these refactorings is an experiment that can go wrong. So it's a bit like if you're playing a multi-level computer game. There might be one bit of it that's especially fiddly, but as a general habit when you're playing computer games or multi-level computer games, when you overcome an obstacle, you save the state of the game, you save your place in the game, because you wouldn't want to have to do the whole thing again. Now, refactoring is kind of along those lines as well. If you're doing quite a lengthy refactoring and you get to, some way into it and then realize you've taken a dead end, it's the worst thing in the world to realize that you're going to have to go all the way back to the beginning. Control-Zing or undoing your way back will only take you so far. It's not always possible to get all the way back if the refactoring is long and complicated. So the final habit I want to talk about is commit. Basically, once you've achieved your refactoring goal, commit your improved code. Now, I'm running a local version control system, and sometimes it's not always possible to commit really, really frequently into a shared code base for all sorts of reasons. And if that's the case, you might want to consider having a local version control system so that you can at least get that undoability, that revertibility on your own desktop, and then do larger commits on a less frequent basis. Now, when you're practicing refactoring and you're learning to refactor, it helps enormously if you have a ready-made supply of code smells, basically. Different kinds of code smells that you want to practice on. So it's not a habit, but it's a good idea, I think, to bottle the code smells. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to do a check-in. I'm going to commit this improvement that I've made. So let's go into the synchronization view. And when I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt a sort of a convention, a naming convention, using a hashtag system, feature envy, and I'm going to identify where the offending code smell was. It was in the customer class, had feature envy for address. So I'm basically describing, first of all, noting that it was a refactoring. The reason I'm committing this code is because I've completed a refactoring. I'm describing what the code smell was, what was the problem that I was fixing, what was my goal, and I'm giving information about where to find the code smell. Now, in a larger code bases, you might need to say which project it was in or what package it was in and qualify it a bit more. But generally speaking, those three pieces of information make your source repository searchable for known code smells, examples of code smells. So someone will find this check-in and they will know that in the previous version of the code, the version before I did this commit, there is feature envy in the customer class. Okay, so let me commit that. Now, of course, I would normally do a slightly more involved sort of check-in dance. If it was in a shared code repository, I would have it would be a full commit. So I would do an update from the repository. I would merge anything if I had to. I would run a full build and run all the tests, and only then would I check in. But I'm using my own repository here, and no one else has been checking in, so I didn't have to do that. So there you go. There's a whole bunch of habits for refactoring. And for doing it safely and for doing it in a sustainable and effective way. The next video, if you're interested, is going to be about design by contract and what it means when you're doing test-driven development. So keep an eye out for that.